The city lights reflected off the floor to ceiling windows of the penthouse like scattered diamonds, cold and beautiful. Alexander Grant stood with his hands in his pockets, looking down at the world below with the detachment of a man who had conquered it. At 35, he had built an empire from nothing, turned millions into billions, and earned the fear and respect of every boardroom he entered. He was calculated, precise, and utterly alone. Not that loneliness bothered him. He had learned early that people were predictable. They wanted money, power, or proximity to it. Love was a fairy tale sold by greeting card companies, and marriage was simply another form of merger. So when his father had called him into the study 2 months ago with the demand that he marry to secure the family alliance with the Harrington Group, Alexander had not been surprised, just irritated. His father had slammed a fist on the mahogany desk. "You are the last of our line, Alexander. This alliance requires legitimacy. It requires family. I will not watch everything we built crumble because you refuse to participate in basic social expectations." Alexander had listened with barely concealed contempt. "So, find someone suitable, run a background check, draft a contract. I will sign whatever needs signing." His father had stared at him with something between disappointment and resignation. "You have become cold, son. Colder than I ever intended." Alexander had left without another word. Cold was efficient. Cold protected you from the chaos of human emotion. He had watched his mother waste away, loving a man who spent more time with his mistresses than his family. He had seen business partners betray each other over jealousy and pride. He had learned that sentiment was a liability, and he had built his life accordingly. 2 weeks later, his assistant had presented him with a folder, 6 potential candidates, all from respectable families, all willing to enter into a contractual marriage. He had flipped through the pages with the same interest he would show a restaurant menu. Perfect pedigrees, impressive resumes, calculated smiles in professional photographs. They all looked the same to him, interchangeable parts in a machine designed to preserve wealth and status. Then his attorney had suggested something different. Marcus Chen had been with Alexander for 7 years, handling everything from acquisitions to personal matters with ruthless efficiency. He leaned back in his leather chair and tapped his pen against the desk. Why limit yourself to their world? Make it a pure transaction. Find someone who needs money desperately enough to agree to your terms without the complications of social expectation. Someone who understands from the beginning that this is business. No hidden agendas about social climbing, no family politics, just a clean exchange. The idea had appealed to Alexander immediately. No pretense, no games, just a clear exchange. That was how he had found her. Her name was Elena Santos, 24 years old, and she lived in a crumbling apartment building on the east side where the city forgot to shine. His investigator had done thorough work. She worked 2 jobs, one at a diner called Rosie's from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and another cleaning offices at night from 10 until 4 in the morning. She slept in scattered fragments, never more than a few hours at a time. Her mother had stage 3 cancer and no insurance. Medical bills had buried them. The apartment was 3 months behind on rent. She had no siblings, no father in the picture, and no way out. Perfect. Alexander had sent his car to pick her up on a Tuesday afternoon. She had arrived at his office wearing a faded coat that had once been navy blue but had faded to a grayish shade, and shoes that had been repaired too many times, the stitching visible along the seams. When she walked into the room, she had looked around with wide eyes, not with greed, but with something closer to disbelief. The office was a testament to wealth, all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that most people would never see. She was small, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and brown eyes that seemed too large for her tired face. There was a delicacy to her features, a softness that made her seem out of place in his world of sharp edges and harder transactions. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that surprised him, her back straight despite the exhaustion that lined her face. "Miss Santos," he had said without standing, "please sit." She had sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. She did not speak. That had surprised him. Most people filled silence with nervous chatter, tried to ingratiate themselves, asked questions to appear interested. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. There was an intelligence in her eyes that the investigator's report had not captured. She was assessing him just as carefully as he was assessing her. "I am going to be direct because I do not believe in wasting time. I need a wife for 1 year. It is a business arrangement required by my family for an important merger. In exchange for your participation, I will pay you $5 million, half up front, half when the year concludes and the divorce is finalized. Additionally, I will cover all of your mother's medical expenses immediately and in full, and I will clear your debts." She had not reacted. No gasp, no wide smile, no tears of relief. She had simply continued to look at him with those steady, tired eyes. The silence stretched between them for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. "Why me?" she had asked finally. Her voice was soft, but not weak. There was a steadiness to it that matched her gaze. "Because you need the money, and you have nothing to lose. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will live in my home. You will appear at events when required. You will behave as a wife in public. In private, we will maintain separate lives. No expectations beyond what is outlined in the contract. At the end of 1 year, you will be free and wealthy enough to build whatever life you choose." He had slid the contract across the desk. It was thick, 40 pages of legal language outlining every possible scenario, every obligation, every boundary. She had not reached for it immediately. Instead, she had asked another question. "What do you get out of this?" "The alliance I need. The end of my father's interference. A year of peace." She had looked down at the contract then, her fingers hovering over it but not touching. "And what if I say no?" "Then you leave, and I find someone else. But I would not have brought you here if I thought you could afford to say no." It had been blunt, even cruel, but it was the truth. She had known it. Her jaw had tightened slightly, the only sign that his words had landed. After a long moment, she had picked up the pen. Her hand had trembled slightly as she signed, but the signature itself was firm and clear. No hesitation, no tears, just a signature and a quiet exhale. "When do we start?" she had asked. 2 weeks from today. My assistant will coordinate everything. A lawyer will meet with you tomorrow regarding your mother's medical care. The first payment will be in your account by tonight." She had nodded and stood. Before she left, she had turned back to him. "Thank you," she had said. Not with warmth, but with a kind of grim acknowledgement. She understood exactly what this was, and she was grateful anyway. He had not replied. The door had closed, and that had been that. A deal made, a problem solved. He had returned to his emails and forgotten about her until the next meeting with the wedding planner. The wedding itself had been a small, private affair. His family and a few key business associates. No friends, because Alexander did not have friends, only contacts. Elena had arrived in a simple white dress that his assistant had purchased for her. It fit well enough, though it looked borrowed on her small frame. The fabric was good quality, but not extravagant. She wore no jewelry except for the ring he had sent over the day before, a simple platinum band with a modest diamond. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and someone had done her makeup, though it was subtle. She looked beautiful in a quiet, understated way that caught him off guard. She had walked down the aisle alone. There was no father to give her away, no family in the seats. Just her, moving toward him with slow, measured steps, her face calm and unreadable. The officiant had spoken the words. They had repeated them. He had kissed her cheek, brief and formal. She had not flinched. The reception lasted an hour. His father had made a toast about legacy and family, his voice booming through the small gathering. Alexander had smiled and played his part. Elena had sat beside him, speaking when spoken to, smiling politely, her hand resting lightly on his arm when the photographer appeared. She was good at pretending. He appreciated that. When it was over, they had ridden back to his penthouse in silence. The car hummed through the city streets, and she had looked out the window the entire time, watching the city slide past. He had checked his phone, responding to messages, already thinking about the meeting scheduled for the following week. The marriage was complete. The contract was in effect. Everything was proceeding as planned. They arrived at the building, and the doorman nodded respectfully as they entered. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet except for the faint mechanical hum. When the doors opened into his penthouse, Elena had stepped inside and stopped, looking around at the vast space. It was modern and cold. All glass and steel and expensive art that Alexander had purchased because his decorators said it would appreciate in value. There was no warmth here, no soul, just expensive emptiness. Your room is down that hall, second door on the left. My assistant already moved your belongings there. You have your own bathroom. If you need anything, the kitchen is fully stocked, or you can order from any restaurant. The account information is on the counter. Housekeeping comes 3 times a week. I am rarely here, so you will have the space to yourself most of the time. She had turned to look at him. Thank you. Her voice was still soft, still even. He had nodded. I have work to finish. Good night. He had started toward his study, ready to put the entire day behind him, when her voice stopped him. Alexander. He turned, surprised she had used his first name. She was standing in the center of the vast living room, small and fragile-looking in her white dress, her hands folded in front of her. The city lights glowed behind her through the windows, making her seem even more out of place. Can we talk? Just for a moment. He had hesitated. The contract did not require conversation, but something in her tone made him pause. He gestured to the couch. She sat on the edge, and he remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. I know what this is, she began. I know you do not love me. I know this is business. I am not going to pretend otherwise or make this harder than it needs to be. Good. Then we understand each other. But I need you to understand something too. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something fierce in her eyes, something that contradicted the softness of her appearance. I signed that contract because my mother is dying, and I had no other choice. I am grateful for what you are doing for her, truly. But I am not a thing you bought. I am not property. I will play the role you need me to play. I will stand beside you and smile and say the right things. But in private, when it is just us, I need you to see me as a person, not as a transaction. He had been taken aback, not by defiance, but by the clarity of her words. She was not angry, she was not pleading, she was simply setting a boundary, and that was something he understood. In his world, Clear boundaries were respected more than emotional appeals. "Fair enough," he had said after a moment. "Is that all?" She had smiled then, and it was sad. Almost. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the money, even though it is saving my life and my mother's life, but for giving me the chance to choose this. You could have forced terms I could not live with. You could have made this humiliating. But you gave me a choice, even if it was not much of one. So thank you." He had not known what to say. No one had ever thanked him like that before. Not for money, but for the way it was given. It unsettled him in a way he did not understand. In his experience, people took what they could get and asked for more. They did not express gratitude for basic human decency. "You are welcome," he had managed. She had stood and walked past him toward the hallway. At the door to her room, she had paused and looked back. "I hope this year is not as lonely for you as you think it will be. Good night, Alexander." Then she had disappeared into the room, closing the door quietly behind her. He had stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, her words echoing in his mind. "I hope this year is not as lonely for you as you think it will be." No one had ever said anything like that to him. No one had ever acknowledged his loneliness, because he had never admitted it existed. But she had seen it. In one conversation, she had looked past the money and the power and the cold exterior, and she had seen the truth. He had gone to his study and tried to work, but the words on the screen blurred, and all he could think about was the girl in the white dress who had thanked him for treating her like a person. It had been such a small thing, such a basic expectation, and yet, in his world, it had been extraordinary. The first week passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Alexander left early for the office and returned late. Elena moved through the penthouse like a ghost, there but not intrusive. He would find evidence of her presence: a book left on the couch, a cup of tea on the kitchen counter, the faint scent of something floral in the hallway. But she kept to herself, just as he had expected. On the third morning, he woke earlier than usual and found her in the kitchen making coffee. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, startled. "Good morning. I hope I did not wake you." "You did not." He poured himself coffee from the pot she had made. "Thank you for this." "Of course." She had hesitated, then added, "I am making breakfast if you want some. Just eggs and toast, nothing fancy." He should have said no. He had a meeting in an hour and needed to prepare, but instead he found himself nodding. That would be nice. They had eaten in silence, the morning sun streaming through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. It had been oddly peaceful. When he stood to leave, she had smiled at him. "Have a good day." He had paused at the door. "You too." It became a routine. Every morning she would make coffee and breakfast. Every morning he would join her for a few minutes before leaving for work. They did not talk much at first, just pleasantries, the weather, the news, safe topics that required no vulnerability. But there was something comforting about the ritual, something that made the vast, empty penthouse feel a little less cold. On the fifth morning, she had asked him how he took his coffee. He had told her, black, no sugar. The next morning, his coffee was waiting for him, prepared exactly right. It was a small thing, but it surprised him. She was paying attention. On the eighth day, he came home earlier than usual. A meeting had been canceled, and he found himself with an unexpected free evening. When he entered the penthouse, he heard music. Soft, classical piano drifting from somewhere deeper in the apartment. He followed the sound and found her in the smaller sitting room he never used, standing by the window, looking out at the city as the music played from her phone. She turned when she heard him, startled. "Oh, I did not know you would be home. I am sorry, I will turn it off. No. He surprised himself by saying it. Leave it. I do not mind. She had looked at him with uncertainty, then nodded. He had meant to leave, to retreat to his study, but instead he found himself asking, "Do you like classical music?" My mother used to play piano, not well, but it made her happy. I grew up listening to her practice. It reminds me of better times. She sounds wonderful. She is, or she was. The cancer has taken so much from her. She barely recognizes me anymore. But sometimes, when I visit, I play music for her on my phone, and I think maybe she remembers. Maybe, somewhere inside, she still hears it and feels happy. He had nodded, and, for reasons he could not explain, stayed. They had stood there in silence, listening to the music as the sun set over the city. It had been the strangest, most peaceful moment he had experienced in years. There was no pressure to speak, no expectation of entertainment. Just two people sharing space and sound. After that, things shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started coming home earlier, not every night, but more often. She began leaving dinner in the warmer if he worked late, small meals that she had cooked herself. He never asked her to, she just did. And he found himself eating them instead of ordering in. The food was simple but good, comfort food. Chicken and vegetables, pasta with homemade sauce, soup that tasted like care. One evening, 2 weeks into the marriage, he found her on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. He had stepped outside, and she had glanced at him. "You can see 3 stars from here if you look closely," she had said. "The city blocks most of them, but those 3 always make it through." He had looked up, and after a moment found them. 3 small points of light fighting against the glow of the city. "Why does that matter?" he had asked. "Because it means, even in all this light and noise, something real can still get through. I find that comforting." He had not responded, but he had stayed on the balcony with her until the air grew too cold and they went inside. As they walked back in, she had pulled the blanket tighter around herself and said quietly, "My mother used to tell me to always look for the light, even in dark places. I think that is what those stars are. Little reminders that there is always light, if you look for it." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," she had smiled sadly. "I just wish I had more time with her." The dinners became more frequent. At first, they ate in silence. Then she began asking him small questions. "How was your day? Did that deal go through?" He had answered briefly, efficiently. But slowly, he found himself offering more, explaining problems, describing frustrations. She listened without judgment, without advice, just listened. And that was something no one else in his life had ever done. One night, about a month in, he came home exhausted from a particularly brutal negotiation. He found Elena in the living room reading. She looked up and immediately set the book aside. "You look terrible. What happened?" He had meant to brush it off, but something about her genuine concern made him sit down and tell her. About the deal that was falling apart, about the board members undermining him, about the pressure from his father to fix everything. She had listened, really listened, and when he finished, she had said something that surprised him. "You know, it sounds like you are carrying everyone's expectations but your own. What do you actually want from all this?" No one had ever asked him that. He had built his empire to prove something to his father, to show the world he was capable, to fill some unnamed void. But what did he want? He had no idea. "I do not know," he had admitted. "Maybe that is something worth figuring out." That conversation had stayed with him for days. He found himself questioning things he had never questioned before. Why did he work 80 hours a week? Why did he chase deals that no longer excited him? Why had he built a life with no room for anything but work? Elena, in her quiet way, had planted seeds of doubt, and those seeds began to grow. The next evening, he came home and found her cooking. She was making something that smelled incredible, and when he asked what it was, she had smiled. "My mother's recipe, arroz con pollo. I thought you might like to try it." They had eaten together, and it was the best meal he had had in years. Not because of the food itself, though it was delicious, but because of the way she told him stories while they ate. Stories about her mother, about her childhood, about the tiny apartment where they had lived, and how her mother had made it feel like a palace with nothing but love and determination. She never complained, Elena had said, even when we had nothing, even when she was working 3 jobs and could barely stand. She would come home and make dinner and ask me about my day like it was the most important thing in the world. She sounds remarkable. She is. Elena had looked down at her plate. I do not know what I am going to do when she is gone. You will keep living. You will honor her by building the life she wanted for you. And what life is that? One where you are happy, where you do not have to work yourself to death just to survive, where you have choices. She had looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or sadness or both. Thank you for that. For what? For caring what happens to me, even if it is just a little bit. He had wanted to tell her it was more than a little bit, but he was not ready, not yet. 2 months into the marriage, his father invited them to a family dinner. Alexander had tried to refuse, but his father had insisted. The merger is progressing well. It is time for them to meet your wife properly. Elena had worn a simple black dress, elegant but understated. She had looked nervous in the car, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They are going to judge me, she had said quietly. They are going to know I do not belong. Let them judge. It does not matter what they think. She had looked at him. It matters to me. I do not want to embarrass you. He had been struck by that. Not concerned for herself, but for him. You could not embarrass me if you tried. Just be yourself. That is more than enough. She had smiled, small but genuine. Okay. The dinner had been exactly as tedious as he had expected. His father dominated the conversation, talking about business and legacy. His aunt asked intrusive questions about when they planned to have children. His cousin made passive-aggressive comments about Elena's background. Alexander had felt his jaw tighten with every barb, but Elena had handled it with quiet grace. She had answered questions honestly, without apology. Yes, she came from a working-class family. Yes, she had worked as a waitress. No, she had not finished college because she had needed to work. She did not try to impress them. She simply existed. And somehow, that was more powerful than any performance. His cousin, Victoria, had leaned forward with a cruel smile. So, Elena, what exactly do you bring to this family besides financial need? Elena had not flinched. Honesty, kindness, a different perspective. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones you cannot put a price on. Victoria had opened her mouth to respond, but Alexander had cut her off. Elena brings more integrity to this table than the rest of you combined. If you cannot be respectful, we are leaving. The room had gone silent. His father had stared at him, shocked. Alexander had never defended anyone before. He had never cared enough to. But watching them tear into Elena, watching her handle it with such dignity, something in him had snapped. They had left shortly after. In the car, Elena had been quiet. Finally, she spoke. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Because you deserve to be treated with respect. Because they were being cruel. Because I will not sit there and let them tear you apart for their entertainment. She had looked at him with something like wonder. Thank you. On the drive home, she had been thoughtful. How did you survive growing up with them? I learned not to feel anything. It made it easier. Her expression had softened with something that looked like sadness. That is not surviving, Alexander. That is just existing. Her words had stayed with him. That night, he had lain awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the difference between surviving and existing. He had built an empire. He had achieved everything he set out to achieve. But what did he have, really? Money, power, respect born of fear, and an emptiness so vast that he had stopped noticing it was there. Until her. The next morning, he had found her making breakfast as usual. He had sat down and, instead of checking his phone, had asked her a question. Tell me about your mother. What was she like before she got sick? Elena had looked surprised, but then her face had softened. She was strong. She worked so hard to give me a good life. She loved to sing, even though she had a terrible voice. She would sing while cooking, while cleaning, while doing anything. She said music made everything better. She also had this laugh, this huge, joyful laugh that would fill the whole room. I have not heard it in so long. She sounds wonderful. She is, or she was. The cancer has taken so much from her. She barely recognizes me anymore. Sometimes I sit with her and I tell her stories about my day, and I do not know if she understands, but I hope somewhere inside she knows I am there. I am sorry. Me too. But I am grateful for the time we had, and I am grateful you are giving her the best care possible. She is comfortable. That is more than I could have hoped for. He had reached across the table and taken her hand. It had been instinctive, unplanned. She had looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him, surprised. Thank you, she had whispered. For what? For caring. Even if you do not think you do, you do. I can see it. He had wanted to deny it, but she was right. He did care. About her, about her mother, about the small, fragile connection growing between them. It terrified him, but he could not deny it. 3 months in, Elena's mother passed away. Alexander had been in a meeting when his assistant interrupted with the message. He had left immediately, something he never did, and driven to the hospital. He found Elena in the waiting room, staring at the floor, her face pale and streaked with tears. He had sat beside her. She had looked at him with red, swollen eyes. She is gone. I am sorry. She had nodded, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder. He had frozen, unsure what to do. He was not good at comfort. He did not know how to navigate grief. But slowly, carefully, he had put his arms around her and held her as she cried. She had felt so small, so fragile, shaking with the force of her sorrow. And something in him had cracked. Some wall he had built so carefully over the years had fractured, and he felt her pain as if it were his own. He had arranged everything: the funeral, the flowers, the burial plot. He had called in favors to get a spot in a good cemetery, had hired the best funeral home, had made sure every detail was handled. She had tried to thank him, but he had waved it away. It is the least I can do. The funeral was small. Just Elena, Alexander, and a few of her mother's friends from the old neighborhood. Women who had worked alongside her, who had shared her struggles. They hugged Elena and told her stories about her mother, how she had always shared her lunch when someone forgot theirs, how she had covered shifts for women with sick children, how she had been the first to celebrate good news and the first to offer help in bad times. Elena had stood by the grave, her face composed but devastated. When it was over, she had placed a single white rose on the casket and whispered something he could not hear. In the car ride home, she had spoken quietly. She told me, before she died, that she was proud of me, that she was glad I was going to be okay. She thought you were a good man. He had not known what to say to that. He did not feel like a good man. He felt like someone who had bought another person's desperation and called it a transaction. "I am sorry I could not save her," he had said finally. "You gave her peace. You gave her the chance to die without worrying about me. That is more than I could have asked for." She had reached over and taken his hand. He had looked down at their joined hands, her small fingers wrapped around his, and felt something shift inside him, something terrifying and inevitable. After the funeral, Elena withdrew into herself. She spent days in her room, emerging only for water or to sit on the balcony. Alexander found himself worrying. He would check on her, bringing her food, sitting with her in silence. She never asked him to, but he came anyway. On the fourth day, he found her crying quietly on the balcony. He sat beside her without a word. After a long moment, she spoke. "I do not know what to do now. She was my reason for everything. My reason for working so hard. My reason for accepting your offer. Now she is gone, and I feel lost. You keep living. You honor her memory by building the life she wanted for you. But what if I do not know what that looks like? Then we figure it out together." She had turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness. Because you have shown me more humanity in 3 months than I have experienced in 35 years. Because you matter to me." The words had surprised them both. He had not meant to say them, but they were true. She did matter to him, more than he had realized until that moment. She had leaned against him, and he had wrapped his arm around her. They had sat like that for hours, watching the city lights flicker below, saying nothing, just being. It was the most intimate moment he had ever shared with another person. One night, a week after the funeral, he found her on the balcony again, staring up at the 3 stars. He brought 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. She took it with a faint smile. "Thank you for everything you have done," she said. "I know this was not part of the contract." "The contract does not cover everything." She had looked at him. "No, I suppose it does not." They sat in silence, sipping wine, watching the city breathe below them. Then she spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really agree to this? The marriage? You could have found anyone, someone from your world. Why make it a transaction?" He had considered lying, but something about the night, the wine, the grief hanging between them made him honest. "Because I do not believe in love. I think it is a weakness people use to justify irrational decisions. I have seen what it does to people, how it makes them vulnerable. I did not want that. And now? Now I do not know what I believe." She had turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You are afraid," she said softly, "not of me, of what I represent, of the possibility that maybe you were wrong." He had wanted to deny it, but she was right. She was absolutely right. "Yes," he had admitted, "I am afraid." She had set down her glass and taken his hand again. "It is okay to be afraid, Alexander. It means you are starting to feel something real." "I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I. But maybe that is the point. Maybe we figure it out together." He had looked at her. This woman he had bought, this woman who had every reason to resent him and saw only kindness, only compassion. She had lost everything, and still she was trying to save him. "I do not deserve you," he had said. She had smiled. "Probably not, but here we are anyway." That night marked a turning point. Alexander stopped pretending the arrangement was just business. He started coming home for dinner, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. They would cook together, her teaching him how to make simple meals while laughing at his terrible knife skills. They would watch old movies, her curled up on one end of the couch, him on the other, the space between them charged with something neither was ready to name. He told her about his childhood, about his cold, distant father, and his mother who had loved too much and received too little, about the loneliness of boarding schools and the emptiness of achievements that no one celebrated. She listened without pity, only understanding. One evening, about 4 months in, she asked him about his mother. What was she like? Beautiful, sad. She loved my father desperately, even though he never deserved it. She would wait up for him every night, even when she knew he was with someone else. I remember watching her sit by the window, just waiting. It broke something in me. I decided then that I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me. Is that why you built all these walls? Yes, but walls keep everything out, the bad and the good. She had reached over and touched his cheek. You do not have to keep me out, Alexander. I am not going to hurt you. How can you promise that? I cannot, but I can promise to try not to. Is not that what caring about someone means? Trying your best even when it is scary? He had covered her hand with his. You are braver than I am. No, I am just tired of being afraid. They sat like that, her hand on his cheek, his hand covering hers, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement, a beginning. 4 months into the marriage, they attended a charity gala together. Elena wore a dress he had insisted on buying, deep blue silk that made her look like she belonged among the glittering crowd. She had protested, "It is too much." It is not nearly enough. At the gala, she had stayed close to him, intimidated by the wealth and power in the room. But as the night wore on, she relaxed. She spoke with other guests, charming them with her honesty and warmth. He watched her laugh at someone's joke, her face bright and unguarded, and realized with startling clarity that he was in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He, Alexander Grant, who had sworn off sentiment, who had built his life on cold logic and controlled transactions, was in love with the woman he had bought. The irony was not lost on him, neither was the terror. During dinner, a business associate had asked Elena what she did. She had smiled and said honestly, "Right now, I am figuring that out. I lost my mother recently, and I am taking time to grieve and decide what comes next." The associate had looked uncomfortable, but Elena had continued. Sometimes the most important work we do is the internal kind, learning who we are, what we value, what we want to build with our lives. The associate had nodded and changed the subject, but Alexander had been struck by her words. She was right. He had spent his entire life building an empire, but had never stopped to ask why. What was he building toward? What did he actually want? On the drive home, she had been excited, talking about the people she met, the conversations she had. He had listened, watching her animated expressions, memorizing the way her eyes lit up when she was happy. "Thank you for tonight," she had said when they arrived home. "I felt like Cinderella." "You are better than Cinderella. You are real." She had blushed and looked away. "You are being too kind." "I am being honest." She had met his eyes then, and something passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement of the thing neither of them had said aloud. The air had grown thick with tension. He had wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his chest ached. But he had held back, terrified of ruining the fragile thing growing between them. "Good night, Alexander," she had whispered, and disappeared into her room. He had stood there, breathing hard, his heart pounding, and wondered how he had lost control so completely. 5 months in, his father summoned him again. "The merger is nearly complete. The board is pleased with your marriage. It appears you have managed to succeed where I thought you would fail." Alexander had bristled at the condescension. Elena is more than a means to an end. His father had raised an eyebrow. "Do not tell me you have developed feelings for the girl." "What if I have?" "Then you are a fool. She is from nothing. She has nothing to offer you beyond what you have already paid for. When the year is up, release her with grace and move on. Do not complicate your life with sentiment." Alexander had stood, anger burning through him. "She has taught me more about being human in 5 months than you have in 35 years. If that makes me a fool, so be it." He had left before his father could respond, but the conversation haunted him. When the year was up, Elena would be free to leave. She would take her money and build a new life. Why would she stay with him? He had bought her desperation, not her heart. That night, he found her in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up with a smile. "Want some?" "Please." They sat at the kitchen island, sipping tea in comfortable silence. Finally, he spoke. "Elena, if you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you do?" She had thought about it. "I would go back to school, finish my degree, maybe become a teacher. I always liked the idea of helping kids learn, especially kids like me who have to work hard for everything, kids who need someone to believe in them." "You would be good at that." She had smiled. "What about you? If you could do anything?" "I have no idea. I have spent my whole life building this empire, and I do not know what I would do without it." "Maybe you do not need to do anything. Maybe you just need to live." He had looked at her. "Is that what you do? Just live?" "I try. Life is too short to waste it on things that do not matter." "What matters to you?" She had met his eyes. People, connection, moments like this. His heart had clenched. "Like this?" "Yes, sitting here with you, drinking tea, talking about nothing important. This matters." He had wanted to tell her then, wanted to say that she mattered more than anything, that she had become the center of his world without him realizing it. But fear held him back. So he simply said, "It matters to me, too." 6 months in, everything changed. They were having dinner when his phone rang. It was his attorney. There was a problem with the merger, a legal complication that could unravel everything. Alexander had spent the next 3 days at the office, barely sleeping, fighting to save the deal. Elena had brought him food, sat with him while he worked, made sure he took breaks. She did not ask questions. She just supported him, quietly, steadfastly. On the 3rd night, when the deal was finally secured, he had collapsed on the couch in his office, exhausted. She had sat beside him. "You did it. We did it. I could not have managed without you. I just brought you sandwiches. You kept me sane. That is worth more than any deal." She had leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad it worked out." He had put his arm around her, and they had sat like that, tangled together, until dawn broke through the windows. When he woke, she was still there, asleep against him, her breathing soft and even. He had looked down at her peaceful face and felt overwhelmed with tenderness. This woman, who owed him nothing, had sat with him through the night. She had cared when no one else would have. And in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he loved her. After that, they stopped pretending. They would hold hands while watching movies. She would fall asleep against him on the couch, and he would carry her to bed, tucking her in gently. They began sharing breakfast, lingering over coffee, talking about everything and nothing. The separate rooms became a formality. They were living together in every way that mattered, except one. 7 months in, she kissed him. They had been cooking dinner, laughing about something silly, Flour dusting their clothes, the kitchen a mess. She had turned to him, flour on her cheek, her eyes bright with laughter, and without thinking, she had leaned up and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, a question more than a statement. He had frozen, shocked, and then kissed her back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. She had melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time in his life, Alexander Grant felt complete. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, she had whispered, "I did not mean for that to happen. I am glad it did." She had smiled, shy and beautiful. Me too. That night, they had stayed up talking, finally admitting what had been growing between them. He told her he loved her. She told him she loved him too. And for the first time, the word did not sound like weakness. It sounded like hope. "I was so afraid to tell you," she admitted. "I thought you would think I was just trying to extend the contract or get more money." "Elena, I know you. You are not capable of that kind of manipulation. When you say something, I believe you, even though we started as a transaction, especially because of that. You could have taken the money and played a role. Instead, you were honest from the beginning. You set boundaries. You demanded to be seen as a person. That takes courage." She had taken his hand. "I fell in love with you slowly. I did not want to. I kept telling myself it was just proximity, just gratitude. But then I realized I looked forward to seeing you every day. I missed you when you were gone. Your happiness mattered to me more than my own. That is when I knew." "When did you know?" "The night of the gala. Watching you shine in that room, knowing that you chose to be here with me afterward. Knowing that underneath all your strength, there is this incredible kindness. I looked at you and thought, I want this. Not for a year, forever. Forever is a long time, not long enough." He had pulled her close and kissed her again, this time without hesitation, without fear, just pure, overwhelming love. 8 months in, they were inseparable. The penthouse that had once been cold and empty was now full of warmth and laughter. They painted one of the guest rooms together, turning it into a reading nook with shelves full of books and a comfortable chair by the window. They adopted a cat from a shelter because Elena insisted the place needed something alive in it. They named her Star after the 3 stars on the balcony. They went on dates, real dates, where they held hands and talked for hours. Alexander introduced her to his business partners, not as a contractual wife, but as the woman he loved. She met them with the same grace and honesty that had won him over, and slowly, his world began to see what he had seen from the beginning. She was extraordinary. But as the year mark approached, a shadow fell over their happiness. The contract was ending. She would be free to leave. And though they loved each other, neither had spoken about what came next. Alexander was terrified. What if she wanted her freedom? What if the money had always been the real goal, and now that she had it, she would leave? He knew these thoughts were irrational, but fear made him doubt everything. One night, 3 weeks before the year ended, Alexander sat her down. "We need to talk about the contract." She had gone pale. "I know. When it ends, you are free. You will have your money, you can go back to school, start your life. I will not hold you to anything." She had looked at him with confusion. "Do you want me to leave?" "No, God, no. But I need you to know that you can. You do not owe me anything. If you want to stay, it has to be because you want to, not because you feel obligated." Tears had filled her eyes. "I thought you would want me gone. I thought once the year was up, you would be done with this arrangement and with me. Elena, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I was empty before you. I was just existing. You taught me how to live, how to feel. But I bought you into this life. I need to know that if you stay, it is your choice, your real choice." She had taken his hands, tears streaming down her face. "I choose you, Alexander, not because of the contract, not because of the money. I choose you because you are kind and brilliant, and you make me feel like I matter. I love you. I want to stay, not for another year, for as long as you will have me." He had pulled her into his arms, relief flooding through him. "I love you too, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. I want forever with you, if you will give it to me." She had laughed through her tears. Forever sounds perfect. They had held each other, and the contract that had brought them together became meaningless. What they had now was real. It was theirs. It was chosen. On the day the contract officially ended, Alexander tore it up. They stood together in his office, watching the pieces flutter into the trash, and laughed at how absurd it all was. They had started as strangers, bound by paperwork and desperation. They had become something neither had expected: partners, lovers, home. Alexander proposed properly a month later, not with a contract, but with a ring and a promise. He took her back to the balcony where they had spent so many evenings, where she had shown him the 3 stars that fought through the city lights. He got down on one knee, and when he looked up at her, he saw his entire future. "Elena Santos, you came into my life as a transaction and became my salvation. You taught me that love is not weakness, but strength, that vulnerability is not dangerous, but beautiful, that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice. Will you marry me? Really marry me this time?" She had said yes through tears, and they held each other as the city sparkled below and the 3 stars watched from above. They married again 6 months later, this time surrounded by people who loved them. Elena had made friends, genuine friends, who saw her for who she was. Alexander had reconnected with colleagues on a human level, no longer seeing relationships as transactions. The ceremony was nothing like the first. It was warm and joyful and utterly real. When they exchanged vows, Alexander felt tears in his eyes. Elena squeezed his hand, and they spoke promises that came from the heart, not from a contract. Elena went back to school, pursuing her teaching degree. Alexander restructured his company, stepping back from the relentless grind to spend more time with her. He appointed a CEO he trusted and moved into a chairman role that gave him flexibility. They moved to a new home, smaller but warmer, filled with books and art and laughter. They traveled, they dreamed, they built a life together that was messy and imperfect and utterly real. 2 years after the original contract ended, Elena gave birth to their daughter. Alexander held the tiny, screaming bundle in his arms and felt a love so overwhelming he could barely breathe. She had Elena's dark eyes and his serious expression, and she was perfect. This was his family, his purpose, everything he had been missing. Alina watched him from the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that I was the richest man in the world, and I did not know I was bankrupt until you showed me what wealth really means." She had smiled. "And what does it mean?" "This. You. Her. Us. It means having something worth more than money, something you cannot buy or sell or trade. It means having a soul worth living for." She had reached for his hand. "You always had a soul, Alexander. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." He had kissed her hand, then his daughter's head, and marveled at the strange, beautiful path that had brought them here. He had bought a bride out of arrogance and convenience. She had stayed out of necessity. But somewhere along the way, necessity had become choice, and choice had become love, and love had become everything. The past, with all its coldness and emptiness, felt like another life, a life he had lived in shadows, unaware that light existed. Elena had been that light, not because she was perfect, but because she was real, because she had seen him, truly seen him, and had not turned away. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to ask how they met, Alexander and Elena exchanged a glance. They had agreed never to lie to her, but some truths were complicated. Elena smiled and began the story. "Your father and I met during a difficult time in both our lives. He helped me when I needed it most, and I helped him remember what really matters. We fell in love slowly, then all at once. And here we are." Their daughter had accepted this with the easy faith of childhood. When she grew older, they would tell her the whole truth. But for now, this was enough. Alexander had watched Elena tell the story, her eyes warm with memory, and felt grateful beyond measure. Grateful that she had walked into his office that day. Grateful that she had seen past his walls. Grateful that she had taught him the one lesson he had spent his entire life avoiding. Love was not a weakness. It was not a transaction. It was not something you could control or predict or purchase. Love was terrifying and messy and irrational. It demanded vulnerability and risked pain. But it was also the only thing that made life worth living. It was what transformed existence into meaning, loneliness into connection, emptiness into fullness. He had been a man who believed everything had a price. She had been a woman with nothing left to lose. Together, they had discovered that the most valuable things in life were the ones you could not buy: trust, respect, companionship, the quiet comfort of someone who knows you completely and loves you anyway, the joy of building something real with another person, the peace of coming home to someone who makes you want to be better. Alexander Grant had bought a bride, but he had gained a soul. And in the end, that made all the difference. He was no longer the cold, calculated businessman who measured everything in profit and loss. He was a husband, a father, a man who had learned to feel deeply and love completely. And every day, he woke up grateful for the woman who had changed everything simply by being herself.